Hello, my friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family. So, guys, I want to talk about Nibiru, the Anunnaki, the Nephilim, the Book of Enoch, and some other things, and looking at it in basically the bigger picture, and going into the Bible and taking a look at some different things, and let's see if we could put some of these pieces together. As there are so many people that believe that Nibiru is here or about to be here. We have so many photos that we have seen of objects associated with the quote-unquote Nemesis system, Planet X, however you want to label it. There appears to be an awful lot of people, and that number is growing every day, that believe there really is something here. Well, there are some that believe everything is just astro-theology. That really, this is all allegory. This is all parables, as Christ taught the masses in parables, because there were some things he would only teach the inner circle in private, and the rest he just taught in parables. And such is the case when we start looking at things as astro-theology. So, we look at things as being more symbolic if we take that point of view. But one of the things that has really hit me lately is the fact that it's not so much either or. One way is right, the other way is wrong, or vice versa. But perhaps there's many different layers to the truth. And perhaps it isn't so, one side has to be right and the other side has to be wrong. So there's been some Bible passages that have been, fascinating and provoked a lot of thought throughout time, such as this. Then God said, and this is Genesis 26, Genesis book 1, 26. So God said, "Let us make mankind in our image," the image of the Nephilim, image of the Elohim. Perhaps that Nephilim is actually a little Freudian slip there as well. In our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. So, one other thing is the plural there. Let us make mankind. And, I remember bringing that up to a pastor way back, and he said, well, that's obviously speaking about God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost. And it's just one of those things that, honestly, if you look at some of the different interpretations as time has gone on, that they kind of try to hide in some of the different translations, some of the newer translations. So when we look at Deuteronomy 32:8, and so remember, we'll start with 7. Remember the days of old, consider the years long past, ask your father, he will tell you, ask your elders, they will inform you. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided the sons of man, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. So God had sons, and so when he gave the nations their inheritance, quote unquote, so when he set the boundaries of humanity and all the different tribes of people, he gave each nation, each tribe, to a different one of his sons. That's basically what this is saying. Interesting. There's other translations over here. And, some have said, no, it was the sons of Israel, like when you look at the NIV. But we've since found older scriptures that go back farther, and it is exactly as this is reading. It's literally the sons of God, or even the sons of the gods. So it's very interesting when you look at it that way. When the Most High assigned lands to the nations, when he divided up the human race, he established the boundaries of the peoples according to the number in his heavenly court. That's another translation. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the people according to the numbers of the sons of God. And if we look on down, we see that there's so many similar ones. And anywhere it says Israel, that's a mistranslation. And we know that for a fact. And actually, it's a cover-up. So this is fascinating. So it's basically saying that God split up the nations, the different people, into he's the one that basically made the nations. And he's the one that set each one of them up under one of his sons. This is how it reads. So this is Deuteronomy 32:8. Very interesting. Gets you really thinking. And then when we look over here, Genesis 6:1, when human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born unto them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old. So now, doesn't that sound contradictory to what it happens after? So these were the heroes of old, men of renown. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on earth, that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil at all the time. So the Lord had regretted that he had made human beings on earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground. For I regret I made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So look at that. And, what type of beings could have intercourse? Because it does say they go up into them, basically. It's not even talking so much about genetic engineering, genetic manipulation, but this looks like, and it even talks about marrying. This looks like cohabitation. This looks like, what happens amongst humans all the time. And having offspring. How could that possibly be if we are really talking about the singular creator of the universe, the creator of everything? Doesn't seem to make sense. But then, as I brought up before and told you guys, one of the other verses is when Adam and Eve had bit the apple. Well, Eve did, and then she gave it to Adam. And they were nervous because they heard the sound of God walking in the garden. So again, does spirit make noise like that? Does spirit have footsteps? Does the source of all? So exactly who are we talking about really here? And this is really what we need to get to, because really when we look at it, the Bible is in many ways, it's a condensed version of some other books. And it's in one thing that a lot of people don't realize is the Bible is a collection of different scriptures that were in circulation throughout different periods of time, was actually written by many different authors. So that's one of the things to take into consideration. And those that have done studying, they will recognize the Yahwist portions, the Elohist portions, and as well as other ways of breaking it down. And so when we look at these, we've seen an awful lot of these now. Ever since the Sumerian writings were able to be translated, the Sumerian cuneiform writings, it's brought a lot to the table. Actually, perhaps brought a lot of clarity, and perhaps in some other ways have really made people very confused. And we see these beings, now they have wings. Do they really have wings? Or is that symbolic? Is that saying that they have the knowledge of flight? And I've shown before, they're often holding something that looks like a pine cone, which is related to the pineal gland. And so some of these beings were referenced as the Shining Ones, or the Watchers. And I've shared with you guys before in other videos talking about who are these watchers. And of course, watchers goes to the book of Enoch, but it goes to other places as well. And so does the ancient and shining ones. So when we look at the Tower of Babel, that's another one that really seems to be perplexing. Now, the whole world had one language and common speech. As the people moved eastward, they found the plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar, and then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we make a name for ourselves." And the word there in Hebrew is Shem, and some argue that it doesn't really translate to name. So otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. You know, did they really say that? I mean, probably not. Except, that part about being scattered, because that's prefacing what's coming. So, but the Lord came down to the city. Now, if the Lord is the creator of all things, he doesn't have to come down to anywhere. He would just know what's happening at all times. He doesn't have to physically come down to the city. And also, where did he come down from? Well, obviously, if he came down, he must have been somewhere high. And so the Lord came down to the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." So why would God not want the people united? Hasn't mankind been disunited forever? And that's really the source of so many miseries. As we look at this smiling little reptilian face over here, yes, I just said that. Just, a little jest, sort of. Anyway, so why would really the God, the prime creator, the source of everything, not want a united humanity? Because obviously they were not at war. They were not killing each other. They were actually building things. Kind of peaceful, like, maybe. That's interesting. That's interesting. And make a name for ourselves. Maybe they were united and truly united. And they were getting along. And they were being constructive. So why would God not want that? And why would he get them so that they could not understand each other? Big questions. Come, let us go down there, confuse their language so they will not understand each other. So the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, and they stopped building the city. And that's why it was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there, the Lord scattered them all over the face of the whole earth. And what did that look like? Did that look like a scene out of Stargate with, ships firing down on the masses of humanity and humans running and screaming everywhere, taking off, heading for the hills? Was this symbolic? Was this doing something to the DNA so that we no longer had activated pineal glands and couldn't understand each other telepathically? What is really going on there? When we look all across the globe, we have the same legends. We have the same myths. We have the same sort of beings always. We have these, mighty and powerful godlike beings that are awfully human. So human that they actually cheat on their spouses and kill each other and show all sorts of vice and malevolence, and yet can also do good things as well and be benevolent. They're extremely human. They're actually more human than human. Is that perhaps where we get some of our tendencies from? When we look at these stories, these beings like Jupiter or Zeus that we're looking at there, who appears to be the same as Indra in the Indian pantheon. And, there's been some really great movies that came out that kind of give you an illustration as to how this could be. Because, in ancient days, the armies were led into battle by the gods themselves. The gods themselves commanded their armies up and against each other and each other's armies. And in fact, the war has never stopped. The war has always been going on. So in effect, perhaps, some of these gods never left, and or their children are still running things. And if you guys haven't heard of Homo capenus, so these are the skulls of ancient hominids. There are tons of these, tons of these skulls. And so, here it says these were mankind's first rulers. And doesn't that look a lot like Jacob Rothschild's head? It really does. And his family controls the world banks. And yes, he does have some of his ancestors' traits, as we could see. And this goes on. I mean, the papacy, why did they have these big fish heads? These big hats? Was it to cover up something? Same thing with the Egyptian pharaohs and Nefertiti. Is that what's really going on? Because the Catholic Church, it goes back to Constantine. And the early Christian church, they had a wide variety of beliefs. They didn't even agree on the divinity of Christ. That was something that was widely debated. So the standard beliefs came about only after the Council of Nicaea and the ensuing councils, after Constantine went ahead and changed from sun worship to worshiping the Son, quote unquote, of God in Christ. And so it was only after that that it became unified, and they put together their doctrine, from which eventually Martin Luther and the Reformation and the hundreds of different branches of Christianity, because there are hundreds of different branches, and they don't all agree today. In fact, they've never really agreed. Yet, basically about 1.2 billion are Catholic and still following the Catholic Church and their official theology, their dogma. It's really all dogma when you get down to it. And still following them, still giving them untold wealth, power, prestige, and they're still controlling so much of the happenings behind the scenes. Because, the Vatican has enough wealth to eradicate any poverty on the planet, and yet they haven't done it. Why? Well, perhaps it's just like the EPA. Why hasn't the EPA cleaned up things? Perhaps they really just don't want to. Perhaps that's not their real agenda. And so out of here, DNA analysis of the Paracas elongated skulls released. The results prove they were not human. Pretty interesting stuff. And there's over 300 at this one location, and they're dated back to 3,000 years. And there's many more of these, actually, from many other places around the world. And so this is in Peru. And it's interesting to look at the Sumerian legends and the Sumerian myths and see how, they were set up over there in what is Iraq. And also, not just there. It basically, Ningishita took off and went, it's thought, to the Americas. And so he established a lot of different cities as well, along with other sons of Enki and Enlil. And so, it's fascinating to look at all this. And there's just too many things to be coincidental. So when we look at Sumerian religion, and okay, flat earthers out there, get ready, you're going to like this part. The Sumerians regard the universe as consisting of heaven and earth. The Sumerian term for universe is An-Ki, which translates to heaven earth. Earth was seen as a flat disk surrounded by a hollow space. This was enclosed by a solid surface, which they believe was made of tin. Between earth and the heavens was a substance known as Lil, which means air or breath. The moon, sun, stars, and planets were also made of Lil, but they were also luminescent. Completely surrounding the An-Ki was the primeval sea. The sea gave birth to the An-Ki, which eventually gave rise to life. And so, again, the world below was known as the netherworld, which we get from many other, pretty much all those sources. Really, when you look at the world's mythologies, they're pretty much in consensus. There's a lot of consensus there. Pretty much, it's very, very interesting. And so, this gets into the Sumerian religion. And so, the gods of Sumer were human in form, and they had very human traits. They ate, drank, married, and fought amongst each other. And even though these gods were, quote-unquote, immortal, not really, and all-powerful, well, not really either, it was apparent that they could be hurt and even killed. Each god adhered to a set of rules of divine authority known as Mi. The Mi ensured that each god was able to keep the cosmos functioning according to the plans handed down to them by Enlil. And so, there was hundreds of different pantheons, just so many different deities and all. And humankind's role was basically to serve the gods. And they also believed that, and that's why they had the temples, they believed that the gods were actually in the temples, not in just spirit, quote unquote. But yeah, if you needed to go see the god, go down to the temple. He's probably there with one of his 24 wives, drinking beer and eating a pig. And so this is what they believed, and it's pretty interesting to look at this. And look at it in light of the Sumerian tales. Now we have the Sumerian lexicon, and so this contains 1,255 Sumerian logogram words and 2,511 Sumerian compound words. And so it's not just Zechariah Sitchin that's been able to decode these Sumerian stories. And there's a lot of people that attack Sitchin, even rumors of him being a 33rd degree Mason. But yet, when it comes down to it, the translations are all pretty much the same. The stories are all basically the same. Now, some people take the take that is pure astro-theology. Again, saying that Marduk is really Jupiter, and really, it's the planets, it's the different constellations, the stars. It's all basically it's just analogy. It's just a way of saying things. And these weren't real beings. These were not beings and bodies that are very, very human-like, perhaps a lot larger. And perhaps these weren't technologically advanced beings, but just astro-theology. So you could translate things that way, for sure, and come up with a different picture. But when you really actually get into them, and so this is the Enuma Elish, and this is, basically it's where the biblical Noah story comes from. And when we date these things, the Sumerian ones, they predate the biblical ones by at least 1,000 years, if not more. So they are far more ancient. They are actually far more detailed. There's way more detail in these. Way more. So instead of getting that little paragraph that leaves you scratching your head, here you get a whole story that tells you everything. Even on down to who drank the first beer, basically. It's just pretty comical when you think about this. It's so detailed and so clear. So it really, sheds a lot of light. And again, fragmented copies have been coming in. It probably was written about 18th century BCE. People have different thoughts on that. And, it's basically a biblical story. It's basically the story of the flood, and also getting into everything that we see. And so many people have tried to figure out who is who. So is Yahweh Enlil? Is Baal? Who's who, right? When we look at the different pantheons too, that is one of the fascinating things to look at. Very fascinating, and this gets into that quite a bit as well. But it's not just here too. There's other places. There's other mythologies that are all telling the same stories. And this is a PDF for the Lost Book of Enki, and so I recently reread that again. And this is about Enki's journey to Nibiru. And then we get into the Book of Enoch. And so it's the way we word things. But perhaps this is all telling the same story again. And instead of fallen angels, perhaps they're talking about the same beings that the Sumerians were calling the gods at the same time. So it's very interesting, and you could look at it that they transgressed the law of Anu. Now, Anu in the Sumerian pantheon, I mean, he did come to Earth on a royal visit before, but he basically stayed out on Nibiru. And so he was the father of Enki and Enlil. And so, there was times, as in any family, when there's going to be animosity between members. And so perhaps, because this is dated about 200 BC is what people think, between maybe 150 and 200 BC. So this is far, far newer than the Sumerian writings. The Sumerian writings are much more antiquated than the Book of Enoch. Yet the Book of Enoch was held in high regard in the early church and was kept out, which is interesting, which was very interesting. And actually we didn't have a lot of copies of it. So maybe there's stuff here, which obviously could possibly lend light and credence to some of the other stories, some of the other mythologies. And so if we change the word, when we're talking about the fallen angels here, and basically use the word, Sumerian gods, whatever terminology you want to, put in there, you could call them, the Anunnaki, whatever we want to do. Again, these are labels, but perhaps these beings are really the same beings, in a sense, because there was a time when these Anunnaki, the beings from heavens to earth, came. They left the earth en masse, and they left us with their children, perhaps Homo capensis, ruling us, the ancestors, the families, the 13 Illuminati families that we know of as well. And of course, we probably have their DNA in us, every single one of us as well. Yet, they did leave en masse. If you go through these stories at a time point. And so, are they going to return? That's the question as well. So when Nibiru returns, are they going to return? Are they going to actually come and land en masse on the planet? So that's a big question. And where have they been? And what are they going to do? Will they be allowed to? And so it's interesting, looking into the Book of Enoch, and I have talked about it in more depth. They are basically called, the Watchers, the Nephilim. And it's interesting, too, that also there is a modern-day UFO story written by Raymond Fowler, in which the little gray aliens abduct this lady, and when she asked them, "Who are you?" they said, "We're the Watchers." Interesting. It's just another connection. And so when we're talking about the Bible, I mean, many people don't realize it's not one book. It's actually a ton of different books. Tons. And, it's many different authors as well. Many, many different authors have done this, put in their part of Scripture. And so according to Jewish and Christian dogma, the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, which is the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, were, according to Scripture, written by Moses about 1300 BC. Of course, there are a few issues with this, such as lack of evidence, as this says that Moses ever existed, and the fact that the end of Deuteronomy describes the author of basically dying and being buried. And so when you look at, there's different styles, and as I was talking about, E stands for Elohist, the name given to the authors who refer to God as Elohim. In addition to a fair bit of Exodus, a little bit of Numbers, the E authors are believed to be the ones who wrote the Bible's first creation account in Genesis chapter 1. Interestingly, however, Elohim is plural. So chapter 1 originally stated that the gods, created the heavens and the earth. It is believed that this harkens back to a time when Proto-Judaism was polytheistic, though it was almost certainly a one-deity religion by about 900 BC, when E would have lived. Now J is believed to be the second author in the first 5 books of Genesis and some of Exodus, including the creation account in Genesis chapter 2, the detailed one where Adam is created first and then there's the serpent. This comes from Yahweh, which is a German translation of Yod-He-Vohe, or Yahweh, tetragrammaton, because they didn't speak the vowels, and so they didn't write the vowels in there. So we don't even really know the exact translation. The name of the author, this is the name the author used for God. So at one time, J was thought to have lived close to the time of E, but there's just no way that this could be true. Some of the literary devices and turns of phrase that J uses could have only been picked up sometime after 600 BC, so about 300 years later during the Jewish captivity in Babylon. And so it gets into that too. And you could really see, if you study it, you could see where Jewish thought changes with each captivity. Because when they were in the Persian exile, they picked up a lot of basically Zoroastrian thought and Mithraic thought. And so, their whole perception of the universe changes a little bit. They start to get very, very messianic and start to be looking for the Savior. And then we have Christianity, which ends up coming out from it, which really has a lot of that in it. The battle between Ahriman and Ahura Mazda, all that good versus evil, the duality thing, that all really comes after, basically the exiles, because their whole way of looking at things changes. And when you're in a different culture, you absorb some of that culture. And then P stands for priestly, and almost certainly refers to the whole school of writers living in and around Jerusalem, late 6th century BC, immediately after the Babylonian captivity ended. And these writers were effectively reinventing their people's religion from fragmentary texts now lost. P writers drafted almost all of the dietary and other kosher laws, emphasized the holiness of the Sabbath, wrote endlessly about Moses' brother Aaron, the first priest in the Jewish tradition, to the exclusion of Moses himself, and so on. So P seems to have written just a few verses of Genesis and Exodus, but virtually all of Leviticus and Numbers. And Leviticus will bore you to death. And P authors are distinguished from other writers by their use of quite a lot of Aramaic words, mostly borrowed into Hebrew. In addition, some of the rulers attributed to P are known to have been common among the Chaldeans of modern-day Iraq, whom the Hebrews must have known during their exile in Babylon, suggesting that P texts were written after that period. And then D is Deuteronomist, which means the guy who wrote Deuteronomy. D was also, like the other 4, originally attributed to Moses, but it's only as possible if Moses liked to write in the third person and could see the future, use language no one in his own time would have used, and knew where his own tomb would be. Clearly Moses was not the one that wrote that. So it's interesting to see it, and so that's where the revisionist history comes in as well. But the point is that it's a collection. It's a collection. And so it's a selected collection, because when they went and put it together in 325 AD, basically there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of texts in circulation. And depending on where you were going and getting together with other Christians, that would be what you would be looking at. And it could be very, very different. Some could be quoting from one text, some could be quoting from another, and then of course we have the Gnostics as well in the mix. And the Gnostics were pretty much exterminated, and everything of all their writings was completely burned by the Catholic Church once they had found what they wanted to be their dogma. And so jumping over to the Vedic perspective and the everlasting Star Wars, and I've talked about this, our reality might be a lot more like Star Wars than we even can imagine. And as this says, this is out of Biblio Tech Bleeds, regardless of what ancient religion or mythology we discuss, the great cosmic wars are mentioned therein. In most of them, if not all, Lucifer's rebellion is mentioned as well in some way, shape, or form. So in the Vedic literature, the cosmic wars are discussed in perhaps more detail than any other scripture, alongside maybe the Norse sagas such as the Edda. In the Vedas, Lucifer's rebellion is mainly a rebellious war between the Devas and the Asuras, and with the Asuras rebelling against the hierarchy. Devas can mean beings such as Lord Vishnu and Lord Krishna, but can also denote others as well. And so it's fascinating because, basically, usually we think of the Devas as kind of angelic or as like benevolent gods, benevolent godlike beings. And then the Asuras are more like demons and devils when you get down to it. And so the very lofty Devas, such as Lord Vishnu and Lord Shiva, usually keep themselves out of the fray, except for when the wars became out of hand, and they felt forced to send one of their avatars down to Earth to regain order. So this is really fascinating when you look at this, because here you are talking about higher level beings that actually incarnate in human form in order to straighten things out again. And so these wars are always ongoing, and when you looked at them, they described, battles between what sounds like spaceships shooting at each other. It makes you think of dogfights, between like an F-16 and a MiG-23. It's just, pretty wild, the descriptions of this. And also, again, the gods, the Devas, and the Asuras will be seen in battle with humans, in using humans as well. Humans are part of the battles. It's pretty fascinating. It's really, really pretty fascinating. So, what do we really have going on here? Is this some sort of alien war going on? Or is this an alien war, but it's also an interdimensional war? When we start talking about incarnating into a human form, there's a lot of people out there like David Icke that will tell you about the reptilians, and that these are, 4D beings that can, under the right circumstances, take a 3D body and or possess human beings. And it's pretty interesting because when I first heard David Icke many, many years ago, decades ago, I thought he was fascinating, but probably a quack, honestly. And since then, a lot of the stuff that he's talked about, it's getting more and more believable all the time, especially with everything that we see. It's pretty interesting, really. So, going into the Vedas, the Puranas, it is so much like these other ones, and the detail here is fascinating as well. So again, if we're looking only at the Bible, we're getting a very, very incomplete picture. But when we start to look at all the world traditions, then everything starts to really clarify. And you start to be able to see a lot of coincidences. Now, when we look at the ancient Hindu texts too, they had knowledge that there's no way they could have had. I mean, how did they know the shape of the galaxy, the span of the galaxy? And they actually talk about there being tens of thousands of humanoid beings in just our galaxy. Different humanoid life forms that are not humans, but very, very human-like. And they get into detail about that. And it's pretty fascinating. It also gets into basically what we would interpret as different dimensions as well. Things like star races, and it's just amazing. Avatars, that whole concept. Now we have the rishis. The rishis are the seers, and they are, again, the ones that brought so much of the knowledge from above to the earth. And so when you look at this, the great message that we get out of the rishis is that all this is going on, but ultimately every single one of us is a divine being. So that whole thought that we are nothing but slaves and created as slaves for the Anunnaki or for the gods, quote unquote, is not really true. I mean, that might be the circumstance. We might be, we might look at it as if we are captured prisoners in a sense of these beings. And when we look at what Buddha saw, and he saw that this whole world was basically Maya, was basically illusion. And recognize the oneness, because that's what we get from these different traditions, is that ultimately everything is one. The duality even is not really real. It's apparent. It's just what's on this timeline. If you take time out of the equation, then there will not be any more duality. So it's a component of our 3D reality on this plane of existence. And these beings, perhaps these beings naturally exist what we would call the lower astral realm, or the lower fourth dimension. And with the Earth going through its changes, with the cosmic rays coming in, the Earth changing, evolving, ascending, going upward in vibration, there are those that think we are now in the fourth dimension, basically in the astral realm. And the astral realm is where we usually are when we sleep. So basically our waking reality is now very much more like our sleeping reality. And so ultimately we're going to go up and out of the fourth and into the fifth, which is a unity consciousness area, which will leave us up and above, where any of these beings could really, any of these negative beings could really affect us. And so when you think about it, and when it says, woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil is, basically coming down to you in great wrath. It hit me today in meditation that could be basically referring to the time period when we are going up through the lower astral realm where all the nasties are. And it's simply more that we are coming up to that area where these things are going to appear more and more solid to us. And it's all about vibrational rates, and where you are vibrating at is going to appear solid to you. It might not appear solid to somebody else that's at a different vibrational frequency. So that is something to keep in mind. So this is really fascinating. I encourage you guys to go deeper into this if you're not familiar with any of these things. And so you have the story of Ragnarok and the apocalypse. In Norse mythology, Ragnarok is a series of apocalyptic events that will define the end of the world, when giants of frost and fire will together fight the gods in a final battle that will ultimately destroy the planet, submerging it underwater. According to the legend, the world will resurface, the surviving and returning gods will meet, and the world will be repopulated by 2 human survivors. And so we see these myths. And here's the punishment of Loki, right? He's tied down there, and you see the serpent coming. And immediately it made me think of the punishment of Prometheus. And Prometheus getting his liver eaten every day, only to regenerate. And why was he being tortured? Because he gave knowledge to mankind. He gave us fire. And so again, Prometheus may relate to Hermes, may relate to Thoth, may relate to Enki, may relate to Ningashira. There's many people that have different opinions on all this. But again, same sort of story. And then the wars between the Titans and the Olympians. It's the same thing again. And the Titans, the older gods, and the Olympians, the newer generations of gods. And, it's fascinating. And so many have tried to put this into astro-theology, to say there's nothing else but that. It's just all relative. It's talking about big disasters in the past and trying to make sense of it by putting a human touch on it. But is that really the case? What really is the case? And like the great and terrible day of the Lord, if you read 2 Joel, it basically says we'll all look up and see the sign, of the day of the Lord and wail, because it is terrifying, and it's such a huge host, such a huge army that comes. And the sign of the Lord in the sky is like this mighty army, and the way it even says mighty men takes me back to Genesis 6. those whether they're titans, giants, the ancient and shining ones, however you want to put it, it's very, very kind of ominous. So what exactly is going on here? What is the bigger picture? And so there's a lot of things that we should perhaps open our mind to, because if the gods really are some other type of being, does that mean there is no God? Well, no, of course not. There could still be a source, a prime creator, without a doubt. And in fact, many people believe that that is what Christ is talking about. And he, in fact, stated to the Pharisees and the Sadducees that they were serving Satan. They were serving the adversary. They didn't even know his God, his true Father, which would be everyone's true Father, the source of all. And we could also make that gender neutral as well. Although typically, in a lot of traditions, the mother was the feminine and was the more material, and the father, obviously the masculine, was more ethereal. And it's all, again, about vibration. So there's so many ways to look at these things. And I threw a lot out there at all you guys. And I want to get your take on it. What do you think? What do you think about all this? What are your thoughts? Do you think that we will see the return of the Anunnaki? Do you think we will see the return of the elder gods, the titans? Or is this just astro-theology, nothing but myths? What is really going on? As always, my friends, like, share, subscribe, thumbs up, support the channel. Please do join our family and share your thoughts, and let's do it in a peaceful manner, as always, because ultimately it's all about the energy that we put out there, which should be one of mutual learning, love, and compassion, especially in these times. God bless, my friends. Namaste.